Tekken 8 has been out in the wild for some time now, and we have kind of left the honeymoon phase that most fighting games usually go through. So it's being looked at with a more critical lens. Complaints are mounting up regarding the overall structure of the gameplay meta, specifically coming from the more competitive players, who are criticizing the more aggressive elements in the game. Competitors are criticizing the neutral skip elements, as well as the constant plus frame mix-up pressure that every character has access to, as well as characters, becoming more homogenized and becoming more rushdown based due to the aggression mechanics enabled by the core systems. After all, Tekken 8's core gameplay theme is focused on aggression, but everywhere I look online, I see the most common complaints leveled at the new heat mechanics, which is interesting considering it's actually a core mechanic in this game. But most competitive players are complaining about how they simply disagree with the philosophy of this game's direction. And they have valid points about why they dislike the system. But I feel that they're not really offering solutions that fit within the theme that the developers intended. So many players have been arguing back with these competitive players that this is not the same game, and that these top players are trying to make Tekken 8 more like Tekken 7.
Tekken 8 is completely different as compared to Tekken 6, Tekken Tag 2, Tekken 7. They all are like very similar when it comes to like the generic basic game plan, but Tekken 8 is a completely different game, and I know that a lot of people are saying, even Joka is saying it's like vanilla version, they're gonna fix it, but I think the direction they are going, I don't like it. Like they are just adding heat engagers, like heat and other stuff, heat burst, heat engager, heat smash. Like the whole idea, I don't like it. It's like the game is for like noobs at the moment. It feels like it's not for like competitive players. Like this is what I'm gonna say.
Eventually, the discourse evolved into a wider conversation about fighting games as a whole.
Where is the discourse coming from? It's effectively coming from the fact that these games are much more offensive focused, but that's not only it. There's a lot more conversations that are happening right now. Oh, the old games were better, this game sucks, or new players could be good at this. There's no way they would have been good back in the day, like that kind of stuff, right?
The topic was, and the general gist of what you were saying was that games are easier now. That's the direction that we're going in when it comes to fighting games, and this is something that I've heard from top players when it comes to Tekken 8 as well.
I kind of feel the need to qualify myself that I am no Tekken professional. I am looking at the system as a casual, but I am someone who's been playing the series since I was a child, and I am someone who's been playing fighting games for a very long time. I kind of play it at what you would kind of call a pseudo-competitive level. I'm a player who plays for fun first. That is always my first priority. But I do take measures to improve my gameplay. So, I kind of fall into the category of someone who understands fighting games in general, but I'm not a tournament player. I've been to a few tournaments in my day, locals, and even a few larger tournaments. But that's never been my priority. It's never been something that I've been striving for. So take everything that I just said, and will say, with that context in mind. I really want to focus on the discourse about the heat mechanic being far too powerful, but they also love using it too, because it's really fun. It is a really fun mechanic, but it's really agonizing to fight against, which is fascinating to see. So why is that? What makes the heat mechanic so divisive in Tekken 8? First off, I want to say that I love the heat mechanic in Tekken 8 so much that it's really one of my favorite additions to the game. It adds some of the most exhilarating elements from the moment-to-moment gameplay. It's a really fun layer that's tacked on to the offensive play and really adds a lot of personality to each of the characters. By enhancing certain properties and every character's signature attack, it gives it more identities to their strengths, as well as new strategies when heat mode is engaged. It's a mechanic that I feel that makes Tekken really fun, and I honestly don't want to see it go away. But it's not a perfect mechanic at best, and it's a devastatingly frustrating mechanic at worst. And I can't help but compare it to the systems in Tekken 7's gameplay, which is mostly mechanically aligned considering it is the previous game in the entry. So let's talk about what's wrong with the heat system and how it can be addressed.
In the Tekken 8 balancing system, metas are especially heinous. In the YouTube atmosphere, content creators diligently work to uncover these details. They are also known as neckbeards, and these are their stories.
Let's first start off with the heat engager mechanics. First, let's talk about the heat burst, which has so many properties associated with this single input. This input has a 16 frame attack with tracking, super armor, armor breaker, combo extender, then it's also plus on block and on hit, and additionally has access to a sort of install mode. Those of you that are unaware of what install means, it simply means going Super Saiyan. Heat Burst provides so many benefits with only one small drawback, which is the small amount of damage it does on hit. Because this move has so many benefits, it effectively has no counterplay built against it. The Heat Burst is able to break the opponent's armor, and with a speed of 16 frames, it makes it impossible for defenders to use their own Heat Burst against it to punish it accordingly, as well as armor it. This move effectively becomes a poke tool with almost no risk involved. Basically, this move is only punishable if you can succeed in making your opponent whiff their heat burst. Then again, they can always cancel the attack if they see you move out of its range. And during the freeze animation, there's a lot to pick up in context clues during the event. With all the other strengths provided, it makes this move effectively a turn-stealing technique, as well as a combo extender at that. Heat engagers can also be utilized by a character's unique attacks to help incentivize players to use these powerful tools. And even better, if you land these attacks on the opponent, you're rewarded with recoverable health and tons of plus frames, enabling you to unleash a hellish mix-up. These heat engagers are usually already powerful, poke-ranged, or usually some form of technique that is already very powerful to the character. Take, for example, Jin's Demon Paw, a powerful tool that Jin has access to that enables him to close in the distance on his opponent safely. Usually this move is usually safe on block, but at the same time it's a mid-range reaching mid-attack, making it a very dangerous technique. Better yet, it can also be used with wave dashing, which can create an inherent mix-up. This example shows us how this heat engager ability enhances an already powerful tool that Jin has access to. And Jin is just the example that we're using. There are countless characters that have the same kind of built-in strength that have been further enhanced because of the heat engager mechanic. And yet, despite all this, with all of these strengths, I would still say that the heat engager mechanic, including heat burst, is not busted, despite what I've just listed in the game. So again, I ask the question, what is the problem? Well, let's talk about the heat gauge itself. When you're in heat, you are enabled to an incredible array of attacks that enhance certain properties of strikes that are usually signature moves to every character. These enhancements range from more damage, armor, plus on block, or giving you easy mode versions of the more difficult higher execution techniques, i.e. electrics or one-frame moves. These super buff your characters for a limited time and are immediately available at the very start of the round. Better yet, when you activate this, you do damage to your opponent even while they're blocking, further rewarding you for your aggression. So you're going to utilize as many plus frame techniques as you possibly can to get the most out of your block damage if your opponent is indeed turtling up. Either way, you're rewarded for simply striking your opponent, whether you hit them or not. The heat gauge barely depletes whether you get hit in a juggle state or raw. When the opponent blocks your attack, or if the fight remains in neutral for an extended period of time. Every time that you land a hit on your opponent, the gauge stops, and you're rewarded with more heat time. Oh, and when you're getting juggled, for the record, you may notice how little heat is lost, which makes it very not influential on the heat state. As well as, if you get hit in neutral, it also pauses the timer there for just a brief moment as well. Now let's talk about the heat smash. This single input literally gives you access to one of the most powerful tools in the game. With some variation depending on the character, this move does devastating damage. It can lead to incredible mix-up potential, or it can do incredible amount of damage. Usually, on block, this move is very plus, which leads to an immediate mix-up game, meaning it's dangerous whether you block it or you land the hit no matter what. This makes the move incredibly threatening, but more so that it breaks armor too, which prevents the opponent from having any opportunity of counterplay. This attack reminds me a lot of Tekken 7's Rage Drives, which, for those of you who don't know, Rage Drives in the previous game was a very powerful attack on hit or block, but only accessible when the player is near death, which enables a comeback potential. However, in Tekken 8, this ability is given to the player immediately right off the beginning of the round. And even better, we have access to this move for an extended amount of time due to the heat gauge system that we talked about earlier, making it more intimidating since the opponent can utilize it near the end of the heat state, reaping all the rewards from the heat gauge, in addition to the plus frame from the heat smash. And if you land it, oh, even better. Oh, and by the way, it does quite a healthy chunk of block damage too. Now, some of the heat moves in this game can be sidestepped, while others do track, and others are practically instantaneous. So some of the characters in the game could get their heat smashes toned down in the future. Finally, let's talk about Heat Dash. Heat Dash is probably the most unique mechanic to the Tekken series due to its properties that it applies during hit on the opponent. It can be used as a combo extender with a hit animation that varies depending on the structure of your combos. Some combos will cause your enemy to twirl, bounce, or even crash. This can net an enormous amount of damage, especially if the circumstances are right. If your opponent blocks this attack, you get mad plus frames, leaving you at a very advantageous position. Heat Dash provides tons of pressure and safety, which enables a 50-50 mix-up game with no initial risk to it. So let's take a look at the whole list of benefits that the heat system provides with each of its mechanics. And it's really easy to say from a knee-jerk reaction that these abilities are exactly the reason why the heat system is broken.
What are people complaining about in Tekken 8? In Tekken 8, people are complaining about everything is just heat burst, heat smash, attack. They're doing the same thing. If you level the playing field so everybody has the same tools, then everybody's doing the same thing. The only difference that exists is the character model. It's just the character model. And that's not really a difference. That's an aesthetic difference. And I'm an aesthetic player. Identity drives interesting interactions. People get to strategize outside of just rock, paper, scissors. Asymmetric balance is more fun than uniformity.
But I think we need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. It's not only one system mechanic that does it, but it's all of them combined, working together within a few seconds of gameplay. You're competing against all of these attributes that the game enables. So from my perspective, I don't think that it's any one mechanic in a vacuum that is breaking the game and making the game feel, as some call, a RNG loot box or a random slot machine gameplay format. I think that the individual mechanics are strong, but they're manageable if isolated. Imagine a match where you can only use Heat Dash. Imagine a match where you can only use Heat Engager. Imagine a match where you could only use Heat Smash without any of the other capabilities. Do you think that would be more manageable? If you combine all of these attributes together in a single round, that's what makes the Heat mechanic feel so oppressive. And it's this that I find to be the primary issue competitive players are struggling to deal with. I've seen a lot of discourse accusing competitive players by trying to make Tekken 8 play more like Tekken 7. And I think that there's a misunderstanding. I honestly don't think that really is the case that they're trying to make. Instead, I think everyone is struggling to interpret what their issues are. And I think that what everyone's really asking for is an opportunity to counterplay against so many oppressive systems. So let's talk about why is it a problem to have no counterplay against the Heat mechanic. And the reason why is because there is no urgency for the defending player. The defending player simply has to deal with all of these mechanics within a very short window, which creates the most frustrating element that everyone is talking about. This leaves players feeling like they're at the mercy of a guessing game. And I know, 50-50s are designed to be guessing games inherently. But typically in most fighting games, they usually require an initial risk, and the reward is the mix-up game afterwards. For taking the initial risk, most players are rewarded with that 50-50. But with Heat Smash and Heat Engager, the initial risk is significantly reduced. And the rewards for guessing right as the offensive player are heavily skewed in their favor due to the attributes of each of the Heat mechanics working together simultaneously. Let's take an example from Tekken 7. The perfect example I would like to line out is the Rage Drive system, which is one of two systems in the Rage mechanics from the previous entry. The Rage Drive works very similar to that of Heat Smash. However, in order to utilize Rage Drive in Tekken 7, you must meet certain conditions in which your health pool drops to a certain threshold. But that's not the real difference. The real difference between Heat Smash and Rage Drive is what happens after you use the ability. In Tekken 7, it's pretty common for some Rage Drives to provide plus frames that give you a mix-up that was not typically possible. This is very similar to Tekken 8's Heat Smash. But when you use Rage Drive, you give up your rage art in response to that decision, and that is what's missing here. The urgency. The making of swift, important decisions that allow you to weigh risk and rewards to what you're committing to. Instead, the decisions you are making in Tekken 8 are much simpler because you get to have your cake and eat it too. You want to utilize a powerful plus frame move that forces your opponent into a mix-up game and keep your rage art at the same time? Well, T8's got that for you, baby. And that functionally is fine. But then you need to provide opportunities for players to counterplay against those options. And currently, you cannot counterplay against these options because Heat techniques provide the benefits listed here. And all the defenders can simply do is either block, and in some cases, Heat Engager back, which is not a very interesting interaction. A general rule of thumb is when you introduce a universal mechanic that every character benefits from, you must include a universal counter, so every character can interact when taking the risk of challenging those mechanics. But currently, the Heat system does not have any interaction. Instead, they simply give one player the means to apply a lot of damage on hit or block, and then additionally, the access to the mix-up game without the initial risk. In Tekken 7, the risk for utilizing the Rage Drive system costs you the Rage Art, which is nothing to scoff at. So now we have identified what the exact problem is, which is there's no actual counterplay against the heat mechanics. So what does that mean? Do we have to scrap the entire heat system and go back to Tekken 7 instead? Should we nerf the hell out of Heat Smash and everything to do with the heat mechanic till they are completely irrelevant? I don't think we need to do anything that drastic. Honestly, I think the counterplay can simply be built into the game by applying strategic nerfs to the attributes to the heat system. This will reward players on the defending side for taking risk. This would not only fit into Tekken 8's core theme of aggression, some may even say that this is a great example of someone's best defense is being someone's really good counterplay offense. So here's my solutions. I will admit I don't know if these solutions are appropriate for this game because balance is a tricky bitch. And I don't know if the solutions I'm going to be providing are the actual best things for the game. But I think what's more important is that everyone understands what the actual problem is. So let's first address the strengths of Heat Burst. If we look at each of the benefits Heat Burst provides, only one of the attributes strip away urgency from the opponent, which is the Super Armor. Super Armor, being attached to a technique that already has so many attributes, enables the player to steal turns from one another. This can make the gameplay flow feel disjointed. Some people have pointed out how the screen freeze slows down the game, but I feel that it's actually more the turn-stealing element that the armor provides that makes the game feel like it's slowing down. This technique is so prolific throughout the gameplay that it's even seen at the highest levels of gameplay. Many attack strings in Tekken can be delayed. This enables frame traps to trick players into pressing a button prematurely. This strategy, however, can be nullified by Heat Burst, which doesn't require any foresight of counterplay. Typically, when you're given the tools to counterplay the opponent, you are taking an inherent risk, which can lead to more devastating outcome if you are wrong. This risk is what makes that kind of counterplay rewarding. Since Burst gives the player armor that can be used to reliably stop at any aggression against you, this eliminates the risk, but grants the same reward. This is not only problematic towards the offensive strategy, this is problematic for the defensive strategy as well, effectively turning Heat Burst into the perfect panic tool. By removing Super Armor on Burst, you get to keep all the strengths of the aggressive elements this mechanic provides, but none of the defensive properties. This will make players deliberately use this move with more intention, as opposed to a button that feels like a kind of a get out of jail free card. A common tactic seen is when an aggressor uses Heat Burst to gain plus frames, but the defender will immediately use Heat Burst back because your options have been reduced really just down to two. Either continue blocking, or Heat Burst, which removes the dynamic nature of counterplay for both players involved. This effectively stalls the moment-to-moment gameplay decisions for both players. With the armor removed, players will start to utilize Heat Burst as a reliable whiff punish tool instead, which we already do. But the reward is not the damage that you get, it is the safe way to access heat mode. That's the reward that we should be striving for. Now, why is that reward so worth it? If we can look at the fact that we can cancel the heat activation, that heat activation cancel is vulnerable to counterpoking. This would make the Heat Burst a valuable tool to enable heat mode. Alright, let's also talk about the heat gauge right now. The heat gauge only depletes when the defending player successfully blocks the opponent's attack. However, they are still penalized by taking chip damage. The best way to deal with the heat gauge is to keep the fight at neutral for as long as possible. When you add the threat of heat smash, or the enhanced properties of the heat engager moves, the plus frames of heat dash, and the buffed signature moves that keep the defending player paralyzed from making any counterplay. So how about we add a reward for the players who take the risk of counterattacking the opponent while they're activated in heat, by reducing the aggressor's gauge when they are hit, and significantly reducing it more when the defender lands a counter hit too. This will create an incentive for defending players to actually risk counterpoking the aggressor. Now let's talk about the really big one. Heat smashes have all the benefits of T7's rage drives, but none of the calculated risks. So I would remove the tracking on all heat smashes to provide defending players the opportunity to reduce the risk themselves from players who are mashing the heat smash button. The aggressor will be more deliberate when they apply heat smashes, and considering how much block damage, plus frames, and mix-up that the heat smash provides, I think this is a fair trade. Additionally, I would implement a buff to the Power Crush to beat the Heat Smash outright, so that players who read a Heat Smash are rewarded with a good chunk of damage, as well as stripping the heat gauge from the aggressor. This would fit into the game's core theme of using good offense as someone's best defense. These two changes to Smash would not make Smash irrelevant, but it would give the defending player the urgency to counterplay against strong techniques. Since the heat techniques doesn't have an inherent cost, like the rage drive did in Tekken 7, then the defending player needs to be able to reduce the risk themselves. Now I know that the focus is about the heat system. However, since I included the Power Crush as part of this topic to beat Heat Smash, I think it needs an appropriate nerf considering how much more usage we would see from it. Now, the way that I would nerf Power Crush for every character across the board is in this specific area. Make the pushback on block far less and punishable by 13 frames. Every character in Tekken 8 has a 13 frame punish that does a sizable chunk of damage, but it doesn't result in a pop-up, so that way it doesn't go so out of control with damage when you consider the wall breaks and floor breaks, even though those are situational. This would make Power Crushes not feel so spammy across the board. But also more importantly, by giving Power Crush the buff to beat Heat Smashes, it is more likely that we would see a lot more spamming of Power Crush across the board. This nerf would help keep that in check. Plus, to be honest, Power Crushes piss a lot of people off. Now, there are some that may say that characters that have mid Power Crushes are going to have a sizable advantage over those with highs. But I would argue that the startup speed of most highs in this game are usually faster than that of the mid Power Crushes. This would be a distinct enough strength to each of the variations of the Power Crush. High Power Crush moves get a faster startup animation, while mid Power Crush moves get a slower startup frames. This would be still universally punishable across the board with 13 frames. Whether you think these changes are good or not does not entirely matter. What matters most is we recognize the problematic state of heat mechanics currently. The developers are being very proactive at making changes to T8, but I predict that nothing will fundamentally change for the game until the heat systems themselves are addressed, since they are a core mechanic of the gameplay experience. Competitive players will still find T8 to be a game filled with RNG mechanics, or so-called casino game littered with 50-50 guesses. These complaints will not go away. Now, there are a few mechanics I did not address in this video, like Heat Dash and Heat Engager. primarily because I am less confident about how to nerf those effectively. Heat Dash might need to be activatable only during hit to reshift its focus from being a technique that does so many things to just simply one purpose. Heat Engager might need to be activated on just counter hit alone. These suggestions that I just put out right here are things that I don't feel comfortable putting my name on, and something that I can say that I'm confident in calling that out. But I think that we could look at possibly addressing those later down TA's lifespan. As the things that I've pointed out so far, I think that do need to be addressed right away, because I feel that those things are hurting the game more so than anything else. My preferred method is to use nerfing with a very light touch, so that way moves don't lose the purpose of why they're included in the game. From my perspective, when a nerf is applied to a move and the move becomes completely irrelevant, that is the worst nerf that you could possibly apply. Alright, thank all of you for watching my analysis on the Tekken 8 Heat system. I really appreciate all of you that are taking the time out of your day to watch this, as it really does mean the world to me. Now, there's going to be some of you that may not agree with my suggestions, in which that is totally fine. And it's important to remember that I have no influence over the development of the game. There's plenty of topics that I did not cover regarding Tekken 8, and I leave that stuff to the other content creators out there. I love Tekken 8, and the criticisms that I'm providing right now are coming from a place of love. And as a fan, I really just want to see the game get better with time. So yes, once more, I will thank you all for watching. Goodbye.